So, welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success stories series of interviews, where we discuss with local business leaders their backgrounds, their successes, their challenges, and what's really driving them forwards. And this afternoon, I'm delighted to have with us Dr. Rachel Lee, who's consultant clinical psychologist at North Star Psychology and Born to be Bold. So, Rachel, thank you so much for spending a bit of time with us. And if you'd like to introduce yourself, your businesses, what you do, and how you help people, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. So, as you know, my name's Rachel, and I'm a consultant clinical psychologist and also an accredited EMDR consultant. So, EMDR is a particular type of therapy that we can use with trauma, anxiety, and also that I'm bringing into the coaching space as well. It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So, I've got a psychology business called North Star Psychology that I set up in 2021. And then so that's a business where I see a lot of people for specialist therapies for trauma and anxiety. They're the main presenting problems that I like to see people for.
Yep.
And that's based at East Thorpe Hall in Mirfield, which is a beautiful old building. It used to be a spa and then closed before COVID and reopened as a wellness centre. And then Born to be Bold is a new venture that I developed last year, which is bringing psychological science to help female founders and leaders develop their psychological power, really. What I noticed in my therapy room was that I was often seeing very successful women who were being held back from, I guess, being more successful or enjoying their success by things like self-doubt, anxiety, limiting beliefs. And I felt a real passion to help these women to bring some of the skills and strategies and ideas that I use in therapy into the kind of, I suppose, the coaching space so that those women can be more successful.
Brilliant.
And we know that we need more female founders, and that often these sort of limiting beliefs and self-doubt can stop founders from either setting up the business or growing the business in the way
Yep.
that they'd really love to. And so, yeah, I was passionate to develop that business, and it's been a really exciting few months.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So, when you were growing up, is this what you foresaw for yourself, or did you have other plans at that point?
It's a good question because no, I spent all of my teenage years wanting to be an engineer.
Right.
I imagined, yeah, I wanted to be a chemical engineer. I imagined myself sort of roaming around a chemical plant, climbing inside, bits of machinery and solving problems in a boiler suit. So that was something that I was really passionate about. Did go to university to study engineering, but then swapped after a year to experimental psychology because I became quite interested in how humans think and behave. And I suppose at the same time, I felt like sort of solving equations and being quite caught up in all the maths and the physics of everything wasn't quite it wasn't quite sort of meeting my needs at that time, I
Yeah.
suppose. I would say that, I'd changed and I wanted to do something different. So yeah,
Brilliant.
after about a year of engineering, I changed and I've never looked back, really.
Brilliant.
But I suppose now I see the engineering running through everything that I do. So
Uh,
it's not lost.
no, I guess I was trained in software engineering at a time when it was an engineering discipline rather than whatever it is today. And it's always been, I've always loved solving problems. And I think that's a factor. And I would imagine part of what you're doing is so helping people solve their problems, or establishing even now. I would imagine. Sorry, I'm probably overthinking this, but um,
Yeah.
I, you know, and it must be fascinating. And I absolutely echo what you said about getting more female founders and female MDs and CEOs out there and delivering. Because I mean, I find when I ask people about the challenges in these interviews, and I hadn't really thought about right now, the idea of imposter syndrome comes up a fair bit, probably disproportionately by the women that I interview than the men. But there are plenty of men that have that too. But really, just thinking about it now, probably more disproportionately. And I think that's, as you said, it can be quite and I've suffered it myself. I think it's quite debilitating sometimes. Certainly in terms of taking the steps to go to that next level of success. if we don't feel good enough or adequate enough to achieve those things.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. And it's something that I work with a lot, and something that I've sort of needed to work on myself as well. And I think it's really fascinating that when imposter syndrome, as it's now called, was first discovered, the psychologists who discovered it called it imposter phenomenon, because they noticed that this was just a very natural thing that people experienced. Particularly, I think they were studying successful women. It was a natural thing for people to experience as they started to progress, to take on challenges, to
Brilliant.
stretch themselves. And I think that's great, because that really sort of validates it as an experience to have. Whereas imposter syndrome sounds like there's something wrong with
Something
you, doesn't
wrong.
it?
Completely, yeah. But funnily enough, someone told me a little while ago that Stephen Bartlett, who's a fairly well-known entrepreneur, he talks about imposter syndrome, and he says he loves it. He loves imposter syndrome because it means he's in the right room and he's probably going to learn something, which I think is again a great way of positioning it. If I'm feeling like that, great. I'm actually in a place where I'm probably going to learn something from people I currently perceive to be better or more experienced or whatever it would be than me.
I think it's a great way of thinking about it. And one of um, one of the key sort of, I suppose, psychological processes that I like to work on with my clients, and focus on a lot myself, is about acceptance. And I think
Yep.
if we can accept those imposterism thoughts and feelings, then we can carry on doing that important stuff that we're doing. Whereas, like you say, often we can get held back by imposterism. We can think, oh well, I'm not worthy of being in that room, or I shouldn't speak up and share my ideas because I don't know enough yet, or I can't send off this report yet because it's not perfect.
Yeah.
And it can really slow us down, hold us back, and just generally make our lives less enjoyable as well, I think. Because when you're trying to battle with that imposter phenomenon, then everything feels more effortful, doesn't it?
Yes.
Everything feels harder,
Yeah.
and your work takes longer, and you don't seize on the opportunities that you'd
Yeah.
seize on. I mean, sort of last year, I had a role in the NHS as an associate non-executive director. And, I'd had a 20-year career in the NHS as a clinical psychologist. So I'd never been in a boardroom before. And you can imagine walking into the boardroom. Of course, I was feeling like an imposter. I'd not been there before. And I think, a bit like Stephen, I talk to my clients about embracing it, thinking about what are the helpful messages that it's giving me.
Yes.
And I want to hold on to those and let go of the rest. And the helpful messages for me, as I went into the boardroom, was sort of thinking, I'm not quite sure of the rules of the boardroom, and in that organisation, there's a public boardroom and a private boardroom, a public board meeting and a private one. So obviously, you need a slightly different approach in those
Yes.
two meetings. So for me, it was about coming away and thinking, right, well, I need to learn more about how to be a member of the board. I need to learn more about which questions to ask and how to put across a concern that I might have, and how to do that effectively. So in that way, it was really helpful to me.
Brilliant.
I think if we can use it to guide us in terms of our preparation or our knowledge acquisition.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, but absolutely bang on. So looking back, obviously, you said you founded North Star in 2021. Obviously, I guess that's just slightly, post COVID, but I'm sure there was still lots going on. As you've grown, what are some of the biggest challenges you've had to overcome so far, Rachel?
Biggest challenges. Well, setting up the business initially was actually quite easy for me. So I was working in the NHS. So now I work entirely independently. But at
Yep.
that point, I was working in the NHS, and I just started to see a couple of therapy clients one evening a week online. And really, I suppose COVID made it easy for me to set up that business, because before then, one of the barriers to setting up the business would have been needing to rent a room and etc., and go to that room as well. I've got a family, so setting that up was quite easy. But I suppose the challenges come more from sort of, I suppose sort of staying on top of everything. I think my biggest challenge, yeah, actually at the moment, that's particularly what I'd say. My biggest challenge is just staying on top of the admin side of the business,
Right.
because as you can imagine, as a clinical psychologist, I'm mostly in meetings with people. I'm mostly in sessions, or I'm delivering groups or trainings or masterclasses. So I'm not sitting at my computer all day, but yet, emails are coming through, aren't they? So that's one of the challenges. I suppose the other challenge I've faced, I think, early on was when I started to want to run some masterclasses, and I think at that point, probably like a lot of people do, I thought, oh, I've got a brilliant idea for a masterclass. This will be really popular. And it wasn't, and nobody signed up for it. Or, I went
Right.
on a course to learn a new treatment, a really innovative treatment for coping with chronic pain. And I thought, gosh, this will be so popular,
Yes.
and I'll be able to potentially you can run a masterclass for 50 people. They can get a lot of benefit from a single session. I thought that would be really valuable for people. And again, just didn't pick up, didn't manage to
Right.
sell any places for that. And I think, that can knock your confidence at first,
Yep.
can't it? But what I've realised over time is that, of course, at that point, I didn't know very much about marketing. I didn't have an audience for those kinds of
Yep.
interventions. I had a good audience and a good stream of referrals for one-to-one therapy, but delivering an online masterclass is quite different, and
Yes.
branching out into a slightly different topic is different.
Yep.
So that was one of the challenges then. I think probably like a lot of entrepreneurs, one of the challenges for me is sometimes working out which thing to focus on, because I have like lots and lots of different ideas. So at the moment, there's probably sort of 6 different things I'd like to do. And it's just slowing things down
Yep.
sometimes, isn't it? And thinking, right, what's the most important thing? And just staying, I think I'm trying to train myself to stay focused on developing one thing at a time, rather than trying to maybe get two or three things going at the same time,
Brilliant.
and holding back maybe.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and because the challenge with too many things is if we then publish or market whatever we're going to talk at the same time, that there's natural confusion that's created, and I know a friend of mine that he picked up some research that said anything more than three choices and people actually choose not to engage with. This was just sales influencing is, they were doing, I think it was marmalade or something in a supermarket where the like the server there says, "Would you like to try something?" And they've got, they tried it with two or three, and then they went to sort of five or six different brands or different types, and only if there was only two or three on offer would somebody say, "Oh, I like that one. I'll buy that one." Once they get more than that, um, the choice is too many. And that's the challenge. If we've got too much to do, then we're going to confuse our audience if we're not careful, as opposed to one thing at a time. If you are this person, you're going to benefit from that. If you're and yeah, but if you're passionate about what you do and you want to help as many people as you can, you want to get it all out there as quickly as possible, I think, don't you?
Yes, and I think that's perhaps one of my learnings, I think, is just about take your time. Yeah, because I am naturally somebody who likes to run along with things at quite
Yep.
a fast pace, whereas just learning to slow things down, steady, methodical, having a strategy.
Yep.
That's what I've really learned. I think particularly over this last year, as I've been developing Born to be Bold, because my psychology practice just runs very, very smoothly. I've got lots of referrals. I've got a bit of a waiting list.
Brilliant.
I'm doing some really enjoyable work with my clients, and so setting up a new venture, which is in a different market, I suppose, has needed quite a different approach, and that's been great. I've really enjoyed learning how to do that and to start from a strategic place. Because I suppose, like I say, North Star just naturally evolved, whereas this is doing something very specific. And I've done a couple, maybe a bit more than two, a couple of masterclasses for sort of accelerator programs, which have been fascinating. I've got one coming up in the next couple of weeks as well at Bruntwood SciTech, and just meeting different founders and entrepreneurs, I find sort of gives me a lot of energy and
Brilliant.
gives me some ideas as well as to what people are looking for. But I've really enjoyed becoming part of the Leeds ecosystem,
Brilliant.
meeting lots of female founders, of course male founders as well. But I suppose some of the work has been very focused in on female founders.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So, looking at your business, we talk about challenges, but what are some of the biggest things you've learned about growing a business? I think you mentioned this idea of, and I think sorry, Michael Gerber talks very much about in his book The E-Myth that when we start business, it's very much about getting customers and then delivering and then running out of work to do. Then we run over here and get some more. But what are some of the things you've learned about growing an effective business?
Um, I've learned that it's really important to think about the problems that your potential customers have and to be selling the solutions to the
Brilliant.
problems rather. And I think sometimes, and I think this is something that I have to think about as well, because I know a lot about psychology and I could help in lots of different ways, is thinking about making sure that your offer really maps onto the problems that the customers have,
Brilliant.
rather than thinking, what would I like to sell? What would I like to do a masterclass on? Thinking, right, okay, what do these people really need?
Yep.
The other thing I've learned over this process of setting up Born to be Bold is the need to adapt your language, I think, or adapt the way that you communicate. Perhaps that's a better way of putting it. Because what I've noticed is, of course, the way that I talk about concepts and ideas in a one-to-one therapy session will be very different to if I'm talking to a group of female founders over a platform. And so learning, it's just fun, isn't it? It's fun sort of learning how to adapt the way that you talk about strategies. At the moment I'm listening to Mel Robbins' Let Them book, Let Them theory, which is all based in acceptance and commitment therapy ideas, about radical acceptance and values-led living and goal setting. And yet she's sort of described it in a way that has made it incredibly easy for people to understand and to use, and it's been incredibly popular, hasn't it?
Yes.
So that's been one of the learnings. I think just learning that it's a natural emotional roller coaster, that you've got these seasons in your business. Yeah, that there are times when you're absolutely running full steam ahead thinking this is a brilliant idea and it's absolutely what I want to do, and then other times when you hit with that self-doubt, aren't you, and you think, well, is this the right thing to do? So for me that might look like thinking, oh, should I be doing putting some of my time into this new venture, or should I just have been staying with North Star Psychology and doing more of that, or growing that business in a different way? But what I come back to, and this is kind of at the heart of all the work that I do, is about being really driven by your values and really
Yep.
tuning into your inner wisdom. And I think, setting up Born to be Bold for me was a bit of a calling. It just sort of came to me on so many different levels, because I've
Brilliant.
always been focused on female empowerment. I've always been about trying to break through barriers. As you can imagine, if there weren't um, not many young teenage girls, in the what would have been in the sort of 80s, looking at going to do an engineering degree. So
Yeah.
that's a key thing for me, is like, how can we break through these gender barriers? How can I empower other people to do that? How can I share my psychological knowledge so that women can have more power, have more success, but also be sort of happier and live a more valued life for
Brilliant.
themselves, and break through some of those cultural norms and cultural barriers that we see. So I suppose it's driven by passion, as you can
Yeah,
tell, Chris.
absolutely. And that's the
Yeah.
place to start. Passion, purpose, and values so key. Get those, not get them right, but get attuned into them, and then we're all on the right track. I think it's like it's a very clear line of what works and what we really feel is important. I think that's bang on. It must be very difficult to spend any length of time doing things you don't really believe in. It's just, I can't imagine
Definitely.
how unpleasant that must be. Um,
Yeah, really hard. I think one of the other things I've learned as well is the power of community, and
yes.
actually the kind of need for community. And you know that saying of like it takes a village to raise a child, and I think it kind of takes a village to grow a business or to
Yep.
develop your business, doesn't it? Because you need people who can be mentors or coaches and guides, but you also need to be around other people,
Yeah.
well, I think, who are going through something similar, who are facing those challenges, those ups and downs, who can validate your experiences, who
100%.
understand and get it. Because I think sometimes, you know, our friends and families, of course, will hopefully be supportive for us, but
The,
it's very different, isn't it, to having a job.
the,
And I think being around people who really understand the ups and downs of that
100%.
is vital.
100%. It's like our friends and family, they're supporters, ultimately, absolutely, and we need that. But also people that understand where what we're going through. That empathy is really, really key to do that. I mean, because we a lot of the work we do is a one-to-one basis with our clients, but we always get everyone together every 90 days. We do a 90-day plan of action, so it's part of the coaching programs that we follow. But I think more importantly, we get everyone together and we share. And one of the things we do as well, which is most entrepreneurial people are really bad at, is actually celebrating what they've achieved. They tend to look at what they haven't achieved yet rather than celebrate what they do. And so we get people, just sharing what they've achieved. And it's just great to see people going, oh, that's amazing. And the look on somebody's, yeah, it is actually, isn't it? I hadn't thought of it like that, but yeah, we only recruited 10 people, added, doubled the workforce in the last quarter or whatever it would be. And it just helped. And as you rightly say, that community, that sharing, that support at an empathetic level, not just at a love level of, I love you, that's I support you, of course, but knowing how hard it is and be able to say, yeah, I get it. And that's why it's only 4% of the population own businesses because it is a hard gig, and there's a whole bunch of other people that are more than capable, but from a technical perspective of running and growing a business, but there is an identity issue there, I think, of things like resilience, things like yeah, that focused nature and finding purpose, I think is key. Um, and you mentioned coaching. I'm keen to know is that you obviously, I think you're aware we're a coaching organisation. Who are the best coaches you've worked with, whether that's business, sport, life in general? Who's had the biggest impact on you?
That's a good question. So I've been fortunate to have a fair bit of coaching actually over the last year because I've been on the NatWest Accelerator program. So I've had some
Brilliant,
helpful coaching there, sort of one-to-one and group coaching, which has been really valuable.
brilliant,
And then I'm part of a psychology accelerator program and receive sort of one-to-one coaching, but also group coaching through that as well. And I think they all of those different elements have been helpful. And I think sometimes, so as a psychologist, obviously it's quite helpful to sit in a group coaching session with other psychologists because yeah, because we can I suppose there's something about sense checking what we're doing and really understanding the nuts and bolts of how we work. But then there's also been a big value to be in in the accelerator coaching group with people who work in completely different
yes,
fields to me, who can offer such diverse perspectives and ask questions that another psychologist wouldn't ask me. So that's been good. But I suppose the most influential coach on me would be Wendy Kendall, who is an organizational psychologist and coaching psychologist who runs the psychology practice accelerator that I'm on.
brilliant,
And that's just been fantastic, actually, in terms of, so when I started the accelerator back in September, I was just formulating my ideas for Born to be Bold, and I was just coming up with a name, and I can remember sort of saying, oh, this name of Born to be Bold, and what do people think? And I felt a bit nervous about it, as you do, don't you? And yeah, just to get their feedback on it, and to help me clarify my ideas about what I wanted to look like and why it's important to me, and um, how I want to sort of push it forwards, I suppose, as well. Because one of the things that Wendy's really focused on, and that I am too, is about how we create regenerative practices in our business, or how we create, a business that can really sustain us over the long term.
Yeah.
And I think often this really resonates with me so much, because I see a lot of people, and I suppose particularly sort of in the therapy room, people who have got successful businesses, but then they're not really enjoying their lives,
Yeah.
or they're feeling really anxious, or the business has grown so quickly that it's causing them so much
Yes.
stress. And so what we're focused on in that program is, how do we develop our business in a way that really sustains us, that nurtures us, and also how do we break away from those assumptions that we've developed through our time in our jobs before our
Yep.
businesses, so that we're not just recreating what we were doing before, but so that we're being more flexible. And so that's, I suppose, and that's partly where Born to be Bold comes from, is thinking that I noticed that there's a part of me that's quite playful and adventurous, and that part of me wasn't, I guess, that doesn't naturally fit with doing a lot of therapy. Obviously within the therapy that I do, I like to have a bit of humor and enjoyment within it. Of course I do. That's like my natural style, but it's not a place where you can do sort of high energy
Yeah.
work, if you like, or more adventurous work. So that's what Born to be Bold is about for me. It's about giving that other part of me something different to do, a different focus, a different venture. And then, yeah, what I'm really focused on is how I then grow these businesses together, so that they are fulfilling, and also give me the space that I need across the week to do other things that are important to me.
Yep.
I'm really into um, running and going outside, and walking, and just being out in nature. Really, that's
Yeah.
what I like to do. To be in big sort of open spaces. So trying to create the ideal life, I suppose, Chris, isn't it? What is success? It's
Absolutely.
having a life that you love.
Absolutely. And the thing I love about business ownership is it gets us way closer to what we would like that to be. I could say to people that own business, I said, look, the challenge, one of the key challenges of owning a business is ultimately the buck stops with us until we've got somebody else in place for whom the buck stops for. That for, our goal for business ownership is that ultimately it's a commercial profitable enterprise that can work without you. So it and doesn't mean you have to stop doing what you love, but you can choose what you do. But I say, the buck stops with us. That's the challenge. The great thing about having your own business is you can choose exactly how it is, when you work, how you work, who you work with, what you work with them on, whether you want to work remotely, whether or not you want to work 6 months a year. We get to choose all that. There's consequences of all the actions and choices. But once we understand that, we can make it fit around the perfect life that we want. We can create a perfect life. It's I'm just experimenting with working a lot more remotely because I love to travel and I just love to be in for whatever reason. I just love to be in different places at different times, and so it's just making sure that I can support my clients as well as I always have, but in a different way. And the interesting thing is, I find when I tell clients that's my plans, thinking maybe they'll think it's a negative thing, most of them go, "Oh, that's brilliant. I'd love to do that." And it's so you
Would
almost
it?
yeah, well, yeah, exactly. So we could become role models for the people. That isn't my intention, never was, but it's like it's what I believe in, and therefore it's I want to live the life that I choose to have, and that happens to be, unfortunately, always wants to be somewhere else, which is a bit nuts. I'm sure there's some psychological issues going on there, but we'll move swiftly on. And whether it's from your coaches or mentors or anybody else, are there any favorite quotes or sayings you catch yourself using on a regular basis, Rachel, about business and success and living life?
Yeah, well, definitely, progress over perfection is key.
Nice. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, because I think perfectionism holds us back in so many ways, and and actually, I suppose that's one of the things I've really learned over the last year or so, is about, you know getting your ideas out there. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just, you just need
Absolutely.
to sort of share your ideas, and you can refine them then based on the feedback that you get from people. So actually
Yes.
you're evolving your product in a better way than if you were just designing it in your office. So that's one of my say-ins. I think I'm really very much about sort of following your heart or following your inner wisdom. So, and noticing, yeah, so that would be one for me, is like follow your heart, or what do you really want to do here. These are the things I sort of say to myself.
Brilliant.
In terms of my clients as well, there's a principle that I have, which is about doing what's most effective. So, doing what's most effective rather than doing what's right. And I
Yep.
think that can be quite helpful. And then Wendy has this idea of identifying your hell yeahs and your hell no's.
Yeah.
So, what are the things that you do in your business that you absolutely love and that energize you, that you
Absolutely.
say, yes, I want to do those?
Yep.
And what are the things that really drain your energy or that you dread doing, and finding a way to filter those out, or I
100%.
guess you might outsource them.
100,
But
yeah.
yeah, so I think that's about being really intentional about the work that we do, isn't it?
I couldn't agree more. I think on the same line, I think it was Brian Tracy talked about the most successful organizations are those where most people spend most of their time doing the three things they really love and they're really good at, and everything else is delegated. It's like, and the reality that what we like we're good at, and what we're good at we like. It's like and funny enough, one of my colleagues, we had a conference last couple of weeks ago, and she was describing this idea of playing to your strengths, which again supports that. Play to your strengths. Let's not try to support your weaknesses. And she sort of drew a line on a board and said, look, let's imagine you've got some strengths that look like that and some weaknesses that look like that. And she said, if imagine if you increased your strengths by 25%, so you're really good at it and you got another 25% growth, you could become world class. You're really going to be stellar at that thing. Now, if you look at your weaknesses, if you increase it by 25%, reduce the weakness by 25%, the best you probably be is okay. So what, it seems like even illogical to do that. Let's go and work on being world class, or try to achieve world class at two or three things, and let all the other things, we have to have somebody else that do them for us. But the thing I found, and it's again something we help people with, is, for everything I don't like, there is somebody else that loves it. I think a lot of the time we hold it because we go, well, I don't like it, therefore I wouldn't want to give it to somebody else that, but they're, oh, they'd be, can't wait. Oh, I can't, I always joke, I've got an amazing ex-client. He managed to sell his half of the business and retire at 36, I think, which was pretty cool. But he's the best organizer I've ever met. He really researches everything, and whether it was while we were still working or even now, because he's a great friend, we, if we need organising, I ask him to do it. Gary, can you sort this out? And it's like we do the best things. It's, and he loves it. And organisation is something that I'm okay at, and I can do. I can do well if I want to, but not my favourite. So let other people do it. No, absolutely brilliant. And you've already mentioned one or two, but any favourite books, podcasts, again on business success or personal development that you would recommend?
Yeah, lots really. I mean, I think like you, I'm a fan of Stephen Bartlett's podcast. I think he
Yep.
gets some great guests on there, and they're really thoughtful interviews. Um, just started listening to a new podcast. The name escapes me. So it's James, do you know James Wedmore? He's got a podcast. Is it Mindful Business, perhaps?
Yeah, I think something like that. I'm not 100%, but yes, yeah.
Yeah. So I've been listening to that. In terms of books, I think I really liked Donald Miller's Story Brand. That's something that I read over this last year, and that made a lot of sense to me. I liked his ideas. Quite like his idea about not overwhelming people with information, which is something that's quite easy to do, isn't it? And I say that knowing that I've got a very busy North Star website that I developed sort of back in 2021 before I learned all this stuff. Yeah, so I like his book. Just thinking, in terms of sort of for any women who are listening, I really like Tara Moore's Playing Big. So she talks about how often sort of our thoughts and our feelings and cultural messages that we've picked up can stop women from playing big. And so obviously that book is all about sort of different ways to play big. So that's really helpful as well. James Clear, Atomic Habits is a great book, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're looking to change something. Yeah, I'm trying to think what else I've read recently. So, yeah, Simon Sinek. I liked his book.
So
Obviously,
do
as you
I.
can tell, I'm sort of very focused on values and purpose.
Yes. Brilliant. No, they're all great ones. Funnily enough, so we have, as well as doing this as the sort of local podcast, we do a national podcast. And my coach James, who's director of coaching from organisation, does that. We interview a whole bunch of people from every walk of business, sports, endurance, and we had Donald Miller, funny enough, present at one of our conference a couple of years ago, and as part of the podcast, we happen to be, he lives just outside, it is Nashville, isn't it? Yeah, just outside Nashville. So we actually did a podcast interview with him in Nashville. I was with three other guys, one of which being James. So he did it at his home. We went and visited him. And he tells an interesting story, and it's actually on the podcast. And it's really interesting. Not, and he talked about overloading of information, and he goes back to Mr. Trump's first term as president, and the other Republican candidate was a guy called Jeb Bush, who was of the Bush family. I think he was governor of Florida at the time, and he said he clearly knew Jeb Bush personally, and he said incredibly intelligent guy. Was really passionate about what he would do if he was able to get the nomination and win the election. And he was so passionate about telling people how he would do it. He wrote a book. He said he wrote a book literally on how I would run develop the country. Um, and then he says, and the other guy just said two things: build a wall, make America great again. That's all he ever said, and he always said it as often as he could. And whenever he would speak about anything, he'd always make sure he said those things. And he said the average, the average American doesn't want to read a book to find out. They were happy to go, well, they couldn't, whatever my view about the person, the country's not as good as it could be, and whatever, certainly not. But he just said it was that overwhelm of information compared to a very simple message, and without getting into the political side of all of that, it was really interesting message of how just keeping it simple was so effective. But yeah, so as you said, it's really fascinating that overwhelm can be just too much.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
It's kind of counterintuitive as well, isn't it? I
It
think,
it really
if
is. Yeah.
you're passionate and you know a lot, you want to share everything,
It
but
it's
actually
it's
people
a
don't
challenge.
want all of
Yeah,
that.
100%. It's a challenge. I say my coaching colleagues. I have suffered it historically. I'm a bit better now, but it's that idea of showing worth that we want to tell, and we often over service our clients, get them to do too much because we want to show we've got all this amazing stuff we can do, and people just go, I can't deal with this. I haven't got enough time. I was quite busy beforehand, so now all you've done is make me more busy, and so it's just slowing down. I love the phrase "slow down, speed up," and I think you talked about that quite earlier about that idea of taking a step back. I don't have to come out with five different services or products at the same time. If I just steadily do it, I can build a better business and a better solution for my clients. Um, and yeah, and speaking of learning, what would you say you've learned about yourself so far in your journey, Rachel?
Oh, that's yeah, good question. I've learned that I can run a business, so that's interesting
Brilliant.
because I always used to say so. I used to live in London, and I had quite a few friends who I guess were um, ambitious, working in the city. Used to sort of say to me, "Oh, why don't you set up a psychology business?" And I used to say, "Oh, I could never." Well, there were two things. One, I felt very committed to being in the NHS, but also would say the classic of like, oh, I could never run a business. I used to think, oh, I don't come from an entrepreneurial family or have in my network. So I can do this, and that actually, I wish I'd done it I really do. I mean, I always knew that I liked innovating. You know, when you've got a job, that it's limited work in a service like it's a really big organization, so innovation tends to be quite slow. And one of the about having my business see see how it goes. And I think the other thing that I've learned is just that sort of sense of really enjoying being around sort of different people who are kind of taking risks and innovating themselves. And I think I've realized how much energy I get from that.
Yes.
And that's been a bit surprising. You know, I can remember going to um, sort of a female founders rise networking event in Leeds at Platform, and I nearly didn't go. I was sat here in my office and I was thinking about what time the train was, and I was thinking, oh, I've got all this admin to do and perhaps I'm not going to make it. And partly that was because of that sort of imposterism. I was thinking, well, will people really want to sort of talk to me as a sort of someone with a psychology business rather than, a tech startup or whatever? And of course, and I thought, look, just go along, and if you don't like it, you can leave. And I went and I had the best time. And actually, it was a couple of conversations there that were the catalyst for Born to Be Bold. So
Brilliant.
I think that is it's a story I like to share as well, because I think it just shows that you don't know what's going to happen when you go to these events. Yeah, so your mind's always going to try and hold you back from going because you're
Yep.
stepping into the unknown. Your mind wants you, our brains are designed to keep us safe, aren't they? They want
Yep.
to keep us safe in familiar settings. So you're always going to get a bit of anxiety coming up if you're going to go and do something different and unknown. But it's often when we go and do those things that these great opportunities come up. And I think what I've noticed, particularly in the Leeds ecosystem, is that there are so many people who are open to collaboration, and it's a really supportive network. And each time I've gone to those kinds of events, I've had a conversation that sparked some sort of collaboration.
Yep.
I mean, just today I popped out at lunch and and met a colleague, fellow entrepreneur, and we're going to collaborate, and that's fantastic, isn't it? So,
Absolutely.
sorry, I might have gone off the point there of like what have I learned, but yeah, I think what I've learned is about sort of enjoying being part of a wide network
Yep.
and and really enjoying these different opportunities for collaboration.
Brilliant. And I think it's, going back to sort of imposter syndrome and all those things we talked about, it's come, I feel it's coming to terms with the fact that I have an interest, we're all individuals, so we have an intrinsic value to offer a community. And it might be a whole bunch of things not to do or whole bunch of things, or anything, but we have that, and it's like being valued. It doesn't mean we're any more or less valuable than anybody else, but we have something to offer. And if that's the case, then and the other thing that I always think is everyone, just about everybody that goes to an event is thinking the same as we're thinking. It's like, they're all not sure if they
Most
should be
people
going.
Yeah, most people feel a bit nervous when they
Yeah,
walk into a networking event, don't they? Most people feel a bit nervous doing that.
absolutely. And it's just I think the quicker we come to accept that, and the other thing I love is this idea that all the magic happens outside our comfort zone. And that's
Yes,
really where it really happens. And the reality I find, especially working with people in business when we start working with them, is for many of them, the comfort zone is actually their discomfort zone. They're not actually particularly happy where they are, but they don't want to move outside of where they are because of the fear of staying where they are. But with a false belief that it's actually comfortable. Again, I'm talking about people that are slightly tarnished in their reputations, but there was a great video of Will Smith talking about skydiving. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but he talks about the fear of skydiving, and he describes agreeing the night before, agreeing a night, had a couple of drinks and oh, let's go skydiving, all the sort of slightly macho stuff that happens, and then waking up in the middle like terrified that you've agreed to go skydiving, and then talked about the whole process of getting into a plane with and he says, and it's the first time you really get in the plane, you've never been in a plane without a door, and all these sorts of things, and then he describes this idea of jumping out of the plane and the bliss that you get from free fall, the incredible feeling, and the craziness that at the point of most highest danger is the point of maximum pleasure, and the point at which you were safest lying in your bed was the point of maximum fear, and and that
Yeah, good point.
that's quite weird. We're most fearful, and he uses the phrase. I think on the other side of fear is all our dreams. Is we can achieve everything on the other side of fear. And I just think it's fascinating that whole because that thing of being totally terrified about something. The fear is almost always way worse than the actual reality of the situation. And I think the quicker we turn that round and go, actually, I should be fearful not going rather than going. Um,
Yeah,
changes.
well, that's it's a great point because I think often we think about when we're feeling anxious about an event, we often think about the risks involved in doing it, don't we? But we don't often think about what are the risks of not doing this.
Yeah,
So, what would have been the risk of me of not going to the Female Founders Network? Well, if I could go back in time, I'd be able to say, well, if you don't go, you won't make these connections that are going to lead to this event and that collaboration. And it's like Steve Jobs. Have you seen Steve Jobs' sort of commencement address at Stanford? And he talks about joining the dots, doesn't he? But you can't connect the dots going forwards. You can only connect them going back. And I think
absolutely.
that's been, if you like, one of my principles for living through life. Really, is that you kind of don't know where the risk is, so you may as well do the exciting, risky things. And I mean, I used to do loads of fell running and races, where you're jumping across bogs and through rivers and things. Never injured myself doing that. When did I injure myself the worst? Running down a canal towpath and I kicked a stone, slid across the gravel and ended up in a real sort of state,
No,
because with shoulders and knees grazed and everything else. So you can think that you're doing something safe, but there might be some risk there.
yes,
Um, yeah, and I think that idea about anxiety. So I was saying, wasn't I, that I'm really focused on acceptance and helping people to have more acceptance. And for me, so I talk about psychological power, and I think our psychological power comes from being able to be in tune with our emotions, to make space for our emotions, to accept them, to accept that we have these thoughts that we don't want, and be able to move forwards anyway,
yeah,
because we've got some skills to unhook from thoughts or to regulate our emotions or our nervous system. And obviously, I've helped hundreds of people with their anxiety. And generally, I think in pretty much every case, the anticipatory anxiety is nearly always worse than the anxiety in the situation. So people who feel anxious, what might they be doing? So people who feel anxious, people who've got agoraphobia and they feel anxious going into the supermarket, you know, with the right sort of, once they've got the right approach to handling sort of that bit of exposure or that experiment of going in there, the anxiety before is generally worse than when they're in there.
yes,
um
yes.
and yeah, and that's what you find, isn't it? If you give like a talk or something, you might feel really anxious before, but once you start and you're into your flow, it actually feels really exciting.
100%. I think I think it was once stated that a fear of public speaking was the number one fear in the world, ahead of a fear of death. It was like that's the thing we fear more than anything in the world, and yet it's nuts. And the reality is, in public speaking is, um, most people want you to be successful. They're not sitting there waiting. I mean, the only thing I would personally, I've done a fair bit is comedy. I mean, there is that desire for people to heckle you if you're not very good. But in most circumstances, even if you're not that good, you don't typically get heckled. You just, and yet we just sort of build it up and build it up and not, yeah, as you say, just overcome it. It's it is easier said than done. But I think there are, with your help and other people's help, I'm sure ways of overcoming those challenges. And so looking forward, and that hopefully not with fear, but with pleasure, what does the future look like for you guys, and what challenges do you think you might face, if any?
Okay, so what does it look like going forward? So for Born to be Bold, what it looks like going forward is having a bit more time, having more time in that part of the business. I'm currently sort of taking people on for EMDR coaching. So this is kind of quite really exciting actually for me because so EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, is a therapy that was developed for post-traumatic stress that
Right.
has then been found and it's a really powerful therapy for post-traumatic stress. And we can also use it for things like anxiety and low self-esteem and chronic pain, and fears and phobias. So it's got lots of ways that we can adapt it, and there's a good evidence base. And what it does is it helps us to process experiences that haven't been processed before. It's kind of like helping you to process difficult emotions and images and thoughts that go with an event from the past. So, and it's based on this idea that in our brains, we've got this adaptive information processing. So our brains will naturally help us to recover from a psychological wound, much like our body will recover from a cut or a graze on its own. But of course, sometimes, like with a cut or a graze, sometimes there might be some dirt or some germs in there that stop the body doing its natural healing
Yes.
process. And it's exactly the same with psychological events. So, you know, often bad things happen to us and we process them naturally and we recover naturally and they don't have an ongoing impact on us. But sometimes things happen, whether it's a big event or a smaller event. You know, it could be a life-threatening car accident, or it could be, you know, yeah, giving a presentation that just lands really badly, or that you feel really anxious and somebody asks a difficult question and you go completely blank, and that's felt really frightening for you or really threatening. So we can process those the emotions that are held onto from those experiences, and that stops them impacting us in the present. So we can also use what we also do in EMDR therapy is we create visualizations for future challenges. And we create those visualizations and then we use the EMDR techniques to process any internal blocks or barriers to performing in the way that we'd like to in those challenges. So if you think about it, you can see how you can bring EMDR into coaching. And the way that I think about it is that it's the power of EMDR therapy for people who don't need therapy. So people who are coming for coaching, they don't need therapy, do they? That's the difference. They've not got clinical difficulties at a clinical level, but they're feeling stuck in some way, or they've got some sort of problems, or they're not performing. Usually it's that they're not performing as well as they'd like to. And so what we can do there is think about, well, are there any past experiences that are impacting in the present?
Yes.
Like, let's say, you know, that sort of a presentation, or maybe some difficult interactions with a previous boss or something. And if so, we can use the EMDR strategies to process that. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're looking at current triggers, current tricky situations and future challenges. And we can also, what's also really powerful about EMDR is that we can install positive resources as well. So if somebody wants to be more courageous, obviously that's where I'm focusing. So I want to help women be more courageous, to lead with clarity, to have more confidence in themselves. So we can think about, you know, well, when was a time when you felt courageous and confident? And we can install that memory so that it's a bit stronger, it's more sort of at
Yes.
the forefront of their minds. And then we can imagine, like, let's think about this challenge that you've got. Maybe it's speaking in the board meeting, or maybe it's giving that masterclass. Let's think about that, and you can visualize it. And then as we use the bilateral stimulation, which might look like eye movements, or it could look like tapping, then we can process any internal barriers to performing in that way. So I'm really excited to start doing more of this EMDR coaching. I'm doing that already at the moment, and I'm looking forward to taking that forward. I'm also interested to think about bringing that into a coaching group. And I'm also in the process of developing an online course for women that will help them to develop their psychological power, because I'm very mindful that some people can't afford coaching or don't have the time to commit to being in a particular appointment every couple of weeks or however often they're seeing their coach. And so, yeah, trying to do something that's more accessible, really, that's
Yeah.
an on-demand course. So, yeah, that's what it looks like. I'm also hoping to host another Bold Connections lunch. So Helen Perkins and I held a Bold Connections lunch at the end of March, which was a networking lunch um, in a restaurant bar and grill in Leeds, and it was just 12 of us who came together to have, I suppose I wanted to create, because I really value community, I wanted to create a networking event where people could have a deeper conversation.
Yep.
So it was like a 3-course meal and it was amazing and the feedback was
Brilliant.
really good. So we're looking forward to running another one of those.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, obviously, plenty on the horizon, and wish you best luck with everything you're doing. And I could keep talking about so many different things with you all day. But for now, Rachel, thank you so much for your time. For anyone that's watching would like to get in touch with you, or either of your businesses, what would be the best way of doing that?
So best way would just be to pop onto the website. So Born to Be Bold is borntoBebold.co.uk. My North Star Psychology, that's my therapy. My private practice is northstarpsychology.co.uk. If anyone wants to connect on LinkedIn, then I'm Dr. Rachel Lee on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. Well, look, as I say, it'd be great to swing by another 6, 12 months and just see what the next stages of what's going on. But for now, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.